get started today and go over the top of this. So we're basically going to be going through everything from following the War of 1812 all the way up through the Mexican-American War. That's kind of the section. We'll have a few minutes next class period, and then we'll talk about the Mexican-American War next class period. So the first start is we need to talk about some Supreme Court cases that occurred that involved a massive expansion of banking in the United States. So McCulloch v. Maryland, and I'm also going to have you write down, if you will also write down this term and then that term over there. I accidentally printed the wrong version of these notes, so my bad. So again, next to McCulloch v. Maryland, write down these two phrases. So again, next to McCulloch v. Maryland, write down these two phrases. Bless you. Thank you. So McCulloch v. Maryland is going to be a Supreme Court case that basically revolves around the First National Bank. So you guys should remember the First National Bank, right? That's the Federalist thing. So following the War of 1812, they had to decide how the banking was going to be. And in Maryland decided they no longer wanted to be involved in this banking system. And so what they did is they said, we're done with the National Bank. The National Bank sues them, and it's then determined this thing that's known as a supremacy clause. So what a supremacy clause basically means is that the federal government has supreme authority over the land. So I want to give you guys an example. Back in the olden days of Utah, we had it in our Constitution that marriage was only between a man and a woman. When the Supreme Court case comes out over gay marriage, can Utah come out and say, well, we're going to ignore the federal government because we have our own laws in Utah? Can they do that? No. When the federal government makes a decision, you have to abide by that here in the states, unless it's specifically said you can't do that in the Constitution. Another example was Ogden v. Gibbons. Ogden v. Gibbons was where the Hudson River, which goes between New Jersey and New York State had given exclusive ferry rights to one specific ferry company. The federal government gave it to another, and it ended up being that the federal government wins because the federal government supersedes the state government. Basically, what you need to know about this is that second bullet, which is, if you will star, that it declares that state governments can't interfere with federal government. Basically, it's showing the power of the federal government. So this is an expanding time period all about how does the federal government, how do they have power in all this. Now, if you will also write down one more thing on here. What are you looking for? Oh, okay, cool. So if you will also write down the words marshal, which is capital M-A-R-S-H-A-L-L, Marshal Court. So Marshal Court. Now the Marshal Court is John Marshall, and he also did Marbury v. Madison, as well as these two as well. And basically what you need to know is the Marshal Court, if you ever see it on the AP exam, expanded the federal authority. So that's what this whole second bullet is this John Marshall, all the decisions that he made as the Chief Justice, all expanded the federal authority of the United States. Oops. Which brings us to the era of good feelings. What are good feelings? They're happy. They're joyful. It makes you feel good inside. It gives you little butterflies in your heart because you're so happy. So I want you to dream for a second, okay? I want you to imagine a world where there are no political disagreements. There are no anger between Democrats and Republicans. Everybody's happy. If you have a different opinion from another person, they say, I respect your opinion and you're a wonderful person. There's no anger. There's no fighting. And especially in our government, where the Trumps and the Clintons love each other and hug each other. Doesn't that make you have a good feeling inside? Yeah? So that's what this time period is. The era of good feelings, which if you will go ahead and star, is the period of time where we had good feelings in our political government. There was no anger. There was no animosity. All there was love. And the reason why, make sure you star this bullet down here, the Federalist Party disappears. Now, basically, that's like in today's world, imagine if all of the Democrats were gone and 100% of America was Republicans, right? In theory, all the Republicans are the same beliefs, and therefore we'd all hold hands and sing songs and love each other. Okay? That's the idea here. Now, yeah?
Do you compare this to Eisenhower's presidency after?
I would say it's similar, but there's still political factions. I think the only difference is that in this case, a political party goes away, while in Eisenhower's case, everybody is so concerned about foreign people that they don't care as much about the domestic stuff. As long as your party believed that you wanted to kill communists, then you were going to win the political party. Yeah. But I would say it is very similar, but I would say we've never had a time as kumbaya as the era of good feelings. Okay, good question. And if you're like, I have no idea what he's talking about, just wait 8 months, and then we'll talk about it later. Maybe like 6 months. Okay? So anyway, so the Federalists go away, and I always get a question that says, why did the Federalists go away? I'm not a historian, but in my opinion, it's because Hamilton dies. If Hamilton didn't die, he probably would have been the president. Federalists would have had a lot more power. But because Hamilton dies, there's no strong person, which therefore leads to not having that political candidacy. So the Federalists are gone, and because of this, there's no fighting. There's no Trump versus Clinton. There's no Democrat versus Republican. All it is the same people. Now, down here below, we're going to go through, if you'll start this last bullet, the 4 reasons why we're so happy. So the first one is the period of strong nationalism. Think about the time period that this is. 1817 is when it starts. Why would we have a lot of nationalism in the United States? Why would we think that we're so great? We won the War of 1812. So if you want to put above period of strong nationalism, War of 1812. We win a war and we feel really great about ourselves. In fact, we feel so great about ourselves that we go and we paint pictures like this. We owe allegiance to no crown. We paint this and literally send it on a tour of Europe because we wanted to show everybody how great we were and how we don't care about Britain. Okay? We were really, really happy with ourselves at this time. Now, other things too, economic growth. What's happening during this time period that would cause us to have massive economic growth? The market revolution. Okay, so I would put above this MR. Now we have all this money. We're having all these different things. First industrial revolution leads to market. Remember, market is specifically about economics, not just the inventions. Territory expansion. Where are we expanding into? You guys remember? The West, because we bought what? The Louisiana Purchase. So I put above that the West, Louisiana Purchase. We're moving west into new places, especially the Mississippi, because now we own it all. And fewer partisan conflicts. Why are we not split anymore? We have no Federalists. So all this contributes to a period of very much happiness. Now, James Monroe, on the AP exam, you will typically hear about him in 2 different things. 1 is the era of good feelings, and 2, which is the more important one, we're going to learn next class. So I would highlight his name. You're not going to hear about him a lot. You're only going to hear about him of the era of good feelings and then the Monroe Doctrine. Okay, but we did have a little tiff, and we had, hello, thank you, James, Jack D. New schedule? Oh yeah, cool. Okay, so up on the board, this is where we begin to expand. So if you notice, all this land is going into Louisiana, okay? Now, if you notice, a new state is going to come out, and that state is going to be Missouri. But there's a problem with Missouri. You see, Missouri wants to become a slave state. Why do you think the Northerners would not like that? Because they don't like slavery, and what's going to happen to our representation? Now, when we talk about how severe this issue was, I'm going to bring up a little dinner party. You see, once upon a time, this guy named Talmadge in New York has a dinner party with all the people who disagree about whether or not Missouri should come in as a slave state or a free state. He goes in front of all these people who don't like each other over the slave state, free state issue and tells them that Missouri should become a free state. A Southern senator responds to him and says, "You have kindled a fire which all the waters of the ocean cannot put out, which seas of blood can only extinguish." What is Cobb basically insinuating is going to happen?
Civil War.
Civil War, right? In fact, Talmad's response, it says, if a dissolution of the union must take place, let it be so. If civil war, which gentlemen so much threaten, must come, I can only say, let it come. Now, you might say, well, wait a second, this is like in 1820, that doesn't make any sense. That's how heated it was. This issue of whether or not we should have slave states or free states is going all the way back into the 1820s. So when we talk about slavery as well, we have to remember that there was a whole bunch of changes that happened during this time period. Because cotton becomes so profitable, black belt, things like that, it leads to an increase in the worth of slaves. So when we talk about the justification for why you would want to keep your slaves, part of it is the cost of the property. So looking up on the board, this is the cost back then of a slave. So in 1820, we're right about here, about $475 a slave. In today's world, that's the equivalent of $9,000 a slave. So when we talk about how expensive slaves were, while we don't treat them as humans, they were worth a lot. In fact, right before the Civil War, if you notice, our slaves were worth about $22,000. So when you take a slave owner who's moving into the West and say, you have to have all your slaves taken away, that's millions of dollars of property that they're concerned about now. So in terms of another reason is abolition. So if you will go ahead and highlight abolition, really this should be like a quadruple star term, but the reality is you're going to know it anyway, so you don't have to necessarily star it. But abolition is the idea that slavery should be abolished. Now, there's two major reasons for abolition. The first one is Christianity. Okay? So, good Christians, Jesus and God, they wouldn't enslave these people. So we shouldn't either. And then number two is unfair representation. Who can tell me what law made it so that they were concerned about unfair representation? 3/5 compromise, right? If Missouri comes in, all of a sudden the slave states have more representation, and then how do I get my stuff? Now, this is mostly going to be a northern idea that's going to end up coming. That's why we have the North and the South during the Civil War. Which brings us to this really hot person. You see Henry Clay, who is a total stud muffin. And he really was, so this picture was taken when he was 50 years old. He was actually considered a total ladies' man. A lot of people, like if you think about people today putting like, I don't know, like Brad Pitt or something like that up on their wall, like people loved Henry Clay. There was actually reports that people would go and like get, like they would send a painter to the guy's house and like paint his house, and they would put it up in their room so that every time they could look at it, they'd be like, oh my gosh, that's Henry Clay's house. Like it was this whole thing. And actually, so Henry Clay's probably the greatest American who was never the president. He ran 4 times and lost 4 times the presidency. And Henry Clay also, though, his second to last time of running, in 1843, a bunch of women showed up to his campaign rally wearing matching dresses that had Henry Clay's face embroidered on it. Like, everybody loved him, and they did say that if women had the vote, they think that Henry Clay would have won because everybody loved him so much. Okay? Which I know when you see this, you're like, oh, I can see it. But Henry Clay, he was an attractive man back then. Now, Henry Clay is an extremely important figure. We're going to hear about him a ton in the next 3 weeks. So Henry Clay is the guy that's going to solve everything. He's the one that's the politician that knows everything to be able to fix the problems. Now, that brings us to what is known as the Missouri Compromise, which is a double star, very important term. If you will also put next to it 1820, the Missouri Compromise is known by 3 different names. The Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1820, and the Great Compromise, which, remember, the Great Compromise is also back in the Constitution era. So here's basically what Henry Clay does. He's, by the way, this is what makes him known as the Great Compromiser, is because of this. So the Missouri Compromise is going to do this. First, it admits Missouri as a slave state. To keep the balance, Maine gets added as a free state. So 1 slave state, 1 free state. Then they are going to create a line all the way across the United States, and they are going to say anything south of that line is automatically slave, anything north of that line is automatically free. You might say, well, awesome, the North gets so many, look at all this. That's because nobody wants to live here, okay? Really, up until the late 1800s, this is 2 states. because nobody wants to live in this area. So this is going to be the most populous. And they thought that like Arizona was totally going to be a perfect spot for slavery and cotton. Obviously, it's not going to be. But the idea is that all this is going to become slaves. So eventually this time, so these states right here are eventually going to come in, things like that. If you want to put next to the line, I'm going to give you the name of that line. So next to the line. The name of that line is called capital M, Mason. So where it says Missouri Compromise, the line, Mason, M-A-S-O-N, hyphen, Dixon, D-I-X-O-N, line. And the Mason-Dixon line is going to say everything south is slave and everything north is going to be free. Now, I want you to imagine in your head that somebody walks up to you and stabs you. Okay? Don't worry, you're not severely injured. You didn't hit any organs, you just got stabbed. Okay? Now, I want you to imagine you go up to your doctor, Dr. Clay, and he's like, oh, don't worry about this. And he goes and grabs a Band-Aid and he puts it over your injury. Now, in theory, will that hopefully stop the bleeding? Probably. But what's going to happen when you start moving around or start, playing a sport or something like that? What's going to happen to that wound? It's going to pop right back open. This is the great Band-Aid of the time period. Basically, this Band-Aids the problem of slavery for about the next 17 years. Then we have another one, but don't worry, Henry Clay's there, and he Band-Aids it again. In 1850, he Band-Aids it one more time. Henry Clay then dies, and we have the Civil War. So I'm not saying that Henry Clay's death directly contributed, but really we didn't have a compromiser anymore. Henry Clay is known as the Great Compromiser, which basically is another way of saying the Great Band-Aider. He's the one that's going to fix the problem temporarily, but not something that's going to become a permanent solution. It's not going to happen until the Civil War. So we'll talk about next class period, his other compromise, and then the third compromise is in the next unit. But regardless, though, Henry Clay becomes that great compromiser. Now, when we look at all that territory, so this is what our territory looks like nowadays. So at this time, we expect at some point to own all this, which we're going to do in about 18 years. But again, all this north is going to be that free. Everything south is going to be a slave. Yeah?
Why is Arkansas still different? It's like earlier in 111, it was Arkansas with a double E at the end.
Yeah, so it gets changed as time goes on, and it's because at this time, it's not owned by the United States. Same reason why Texas was originally called the Texas Republic. Once it gets annexed and brought into the United States, that's when it gets changed into the proper spelling. At that time, that was improper English, which is why it gets changed into the Arkansas it's known as today. Now, remember all that happy-go-lucky feelings? Now they're all going to be destroyed. So the election of 1824 is when all that happiness and joy is going to end. Now, the four people you see above are all going to run as Democratic Republicans. So the first thing you need to know about this election, everybody was a Democratic Republican. Now, Andrew Jackson, our hero from the War of 1812 and the Battle of New Orleans, okay, he's going to run for presidency. John Quincy Adams is going to be the son of John Adams. So he's going to ride a whole bunch of his dad's power. Henry Crawford, we don't really care about him too much. We don't hear about him again, but he's a southern plantation slave owner. And, of course, our savior, Henry Clay. Okay? Now, they are all going to run under that same ticket, and it results in this map. Now, notice, does this map look a little bit different in terms of coloring compared to our modern-day elections? When you have four people running for the same party, this is what happens. It splits the ticket. So back when, in 2016, Donald Trump had said that had he not received the nomination, that he was going to run as an independent and run no matter what, that more than likely would have split that Republican Party and the Democrats would have won because people wouldn't have known who to vote for. Well, that's what happens here. You have four Democratic Republicans. Who do you vote for if they're all the same political beliefs and theory? So it's like in today's world, if like Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, and Elizabeth Warren, if they all ran at the same time, that would split all those party tickets. That's why they don't have those today. So this is our election numbers. So I want you to think in your head after looking at this, who do you think won the presidency? So looking at this, who do you think won? Who do you think won? Who do you think won? Okay, of course, John Quincy Adams. Now you might say, why? Andrew Jackson wins. So why doesn't he win the presidency? This is where it gets complicated. We've only done this 2 times in our history. So here's how it works. If we have an instance like this, where nobody gets a majority of the electoral vote. So Jackson was like 3 below what he needed to get to be able to get the majority. If that happens, the top 3 candidates, so unfortunately Henry Clay is gone, the top 3 candidates go in front of the House of Representatives and they vote. Whoever gets the majority of vote wins. Now, we actually had an interesting thing happen here in Utah that was very similar. So back in the 2016 election, if you've ever heard of this guy, he was the Provo mayor, and he ran for the presidency on the Libertarian Party. Libertarian is a far-right Republican. So he ran for the presidency, but he never had a goal to win the Electoral College. He knew it would be impossible. His goal was to win enough electoral votes to prevent either of them from getting the majority. It would go to the House of Representatives, and then they would vote him in. That was the whole goal. Now, it didn't work. He actually didn't win any electoral votes, but he did try. But that's basically how that works. So, in this case, Jackson, Adams, and Crawford are going to go to the House. Now, in theory, you would think Jackson's going to win, right? Even if you just take Clay's things and put it to Jackson, he would have easily won by a landslide. But this is where it gets really, really sketchy. You see, Henry Clay was the Speaker of the House. Everybody loved him. He had a lot of influence and power. Now, I'm not saying Henry Clay is corrupt. All this is allegedly occurred. No evidence. Okay? Allegedly, though, John Quincy Adams goes up to Henry Clay. Says, hey, I know you have a lot of influence in the House. If you convince people to vote for me, I will make you the Secretary of State. Magically, guess who wins? John Quincy Adams. Now, this is what's known as the corrupt bargain, and this is a starred term, corrupt bargain. And I would make sure to circle 1824, because you might see that on the AP exam, the actual date. So the corrupt bargain is the idea that John Quincy Adams bargained with Henry Clay for the presidency. So you need to know that Clay becomes the Secretary of State, Adams becomes the president, and Jackson becomes salty. In fact, so salty that he does not trust anybody in the government. Now, this corrupt bargain, did it happen? Probably. I would say this is going to be probably one of 2 of the most corrupt elections in American history, the second being 1870. But basically, this puts Adams into the presidency, and Jackson is going to hate this and stew on it for years. So Jackson lets this sit with him for pretty much forever. Now, when John Quincy Adams is inaugurated, this is his opening statement. So I want you to imagine a brand new president goes in front and says this. I came into the presidency less possessed of your confidence in advance than any of my predecessors. What is basically John Quincy Adams saying? Yeah, nobody likes me, right? I come in, you guys already don't trust me. But don't worry, guys. I'll prove you wrong. Do you think he proves them wrong? No, he serves 1 term. So John Quincy Adams comes into the presidency, serves 4 years, and nobody pretty much likes him. Now, there was one huge positive that happened, and it's because Henry Clay did it. So Henry Clay, as the Secretary of State, institutes what's known as the American system. This is a double-star term. There has been a lot of talk of a Jacksonian, Jeffersonian America DBQ. The American system would more than likely be on that DBQ if it was in this time period. So I would also think it would be a really good LEQ. They haven't asked an LEQ on this in a long time. So here's basically how it works. Make sure first off that you know this is Henry Clay. So make sure you know this is Henry Clay. And if you will highlight internal government improvements. So Henry Clay basically believes that if we improve our internal government system and everything inside of it, we can become a better commerce economy and a better America. So here's how it works. They begin to invest in the national government in 3 different ways. I would make sure to bracket these. You need to know all 3 of these are ways that the American system improves our government. The first, we create a tariff that boosts our American industry. The second is we create a new national bank. The first national bank dies shortly after that, McCulloch v. Maryland. And we need a new national bank to create new commerce. And 3, I would go ahead and star. roads and canals get massively introduced. Basically, anything we can to create a trade-based economy that can benefit. Now, I want you to look at this map. This is all the roads that come out of the American system.
Attention teachers and students, pardon the interruption. Due to a broken pipe, the water will be turned off in B building only for the rest of the day. So if you'll need to use the restrooms, you'll need to come to A building. Again, the water in B building will be turned off for the rest of the day. We apologize for any inconvenience.
Luckily, we're in A building. Haha, suckers. Okay, anyways, so on here, I want you to notice about this map, these are all the roads that are created during the American system. Who gets the most benefit? What part of the country? The North. Do you guys notice how many roads and things like that are up in the North? Okay. The South has hardly anything at all. And this, by the way, doesn't change to the Civil War. It's part of the reason the Americans are able to win the Civil War is because all this down below is going to end up coming from there. So what ends up happening is that the American system really benefits the North. So make sure you know that it benefits the North. So again, make sure you know it benefits the North. And basically what happens is that the North gets that massive, massive benefit of being able to have all those different roads. And of course, this is going to benefit northern bakers and different things like that. Brings us to the election of 1828. Now, if there's two elections, there's certain elections that you need to know. 24 and 28 are both really, really important elections. Now, first, this is going to be the return of the political parties. So what happens is that political parties are going to come back and they are going to end up returning. And the reason why they end up returning is because basically you have the Democrats are going to come back with Jackson. So Jackson switches the Democratic Republicans and are now going to become Democrats. Okay, so again, the Democratic Republicans now becomes the Democrats. Clay creates a new government, or a new political party known as the Whigs. So the Whigs get created as well. Now, John Quincy Adams is going to go against Andrew Jackson, and it also represents the first major time that political campaigning is going to exist as well. So pamphlets and different things like that encouraging you to be able to vote for a certain person. Now, if you notice this is one example of that mudslinging is what we call it. So basically what this is saying is that when Andrew Jackson was in the War of 1812, you can see it says an account of some of the bloody deeds of Andrew Jackson, or General Jackson. It basically talks about how he was in a battle and 6 of his people died, and so therefore he's a bloody murderer of his soldiers because 6 people died in this battle. So things like that to attempt a campaign. This is also the first time that you're going to have souvenirs. So if you've ever seen like how Donald Trump had the MAGA hats or how Obama has the Hope shirts, this is the first time they're going to have souvenirs. So people would buy like little teacups with John Adams' face on it and sip out of it, and that money would go towards John Adams. So it's the first major attempt at that campaigning. Now the Democrats are important because if you will highlight the common man. So the Democrats are really going to focus on how did the common man get into the different places. Before, it was mostly the rich that were able to be in the presidency. Now they want the common man to be able to be allowed in the presidency. And they're really pretty anti-government. The Whigs, on the other hand, are going to be Henry Clay and John Adams. Now they're going to support a really strong national government in the economy and internal improvements. Internal improvements is another word for what term that we use today? We learned it today. Internal improvements. American system, okay? So basically, the Whig Party is the American system. That's their goal. They supported the supremacy of Congress over the president, so basically allowing a larger federal government. They hated Jackson, and trust me, Jackson hated them too. And then they were born from the Federalist Party, so they're mostly going to be Federalists, and former members of the Democratic Republicans. They're basically a brand new Federalist Party. Now, in the end, Andrew Jackson wins by a landslide. John Quincy Adams does not win the presidency, nor does Henry Clay, which brings us to Andrew Jackson as a president. Now, in terms of Andrew Jackson as a president, Andrew Jackson feels like he has finally been vindicated, right? All those people who doubted him are gone, and he is now going to get back at anybody and everybody that he can. So he creates what is known as the spoils system. If you'll go ahead and star this term. The spoils system is basically the idea of rewarding people who have helped you out. So for example, let's pretend like here in the class, it's towards the end of the semester. And some of you decide, oh, Miss Ray, I bought you this gift. Oh, Miss Ray, I did this for you. And magically what happens when they go to do your grades? You know, these people deserve a little nudge, and I'm starting to give them a little bit more points. That's this idea of the spoil system. The spoil system is basically the idea that you have won this position, so now you get to spoil yourself. It's to the victor belong the spoils. So this is the phrase that it actually comes from. So if you notice, he not only won the tournament, but ended up with the numerous lucrative endorsements, to the victor belong the spoils. So basically what he did is he fired everybody. So all those people who hated him, all those people who doubted him, he fires everybody. He then begins to put into power people that he prefers. So for example, oh, you donated to my political party? Here's a position in government. Oh, you're my brother-in-law? Here's a Secretary of State position. Oh, you helped me out when I was trying to become a budding politician? Here's yours as well. It's basically the idea of giving people stuff for the goods that they do to you. Now what happens is I want to give you an example of today. So back when Hurricane Maria struck into the Caribbean, a lot of Caribbean nations were destroyed. In particular, Puerto Rico lost almost all their power, had billions of dollars of damage, thousands of people were killed. Now they wanted to restore power as quickly as they possibly could, so they did a bidding system, and Whitefish Energy won the bid to go down and fix it. It was a $400 million contract this company got to go down and fix this power. They go down, and for 3 weeks, they go to improve the power in Puerto Rico, and then after 3 weeks, they're pulled after doing a tenth of the job. Reason why they were pulled? The current Secretary of the Interior, turns out his best friend was the CEO of Whitefish. Now, according to him, he was like, oh, I didn't know he was the CEO, I wasn't aware, different things like that. He ends up getting forced to resign, saying that he had a spoil system of giving his friend this $400 million contract. Now, he was replaced by a guy named Ryan Zink, which Utah really liked Ryan Zink. He was huge into like the reduction of bears' ears and different things like that last year. However, Ryan Zink is no longer the Secretary of the Interior because he also was forced to resign last year amid some scandals as well. And I believe we just had 2 secretaries resign in the last 2 weeks, and I can't remember if one of them was the Interior or not. So I don't remember if we have a 4th Interior right now or if we're still in our 3rd, but we've had huge turnover in our secretaries this presidency. So I want you to take your packet and flip to the back. Some of you it's on the back, some of you it's on the 2nd page, whatever, it looks like this. And if you say, Miss Ray, I don't have this paper, that means you didn't pick up 2 papers, and it's over available in the A-push box. Okay, so we are going to analyze this political cartoon. So what I want you to take is I want you to take the next 5 minutes, and I want you to go ahead and circle 5 things that you are noticing in this image. So 5 things that might actually, like, why did they draw this? Then I want you to label what it is, and then put underneath it what you think it was drawn for. So why is he sitting on a certain thing, or why is he doing this or that? So again, circle, label, and then write down what you think it means. So again, make sure you've circled 5 things, labeled what it is, and then put below what you think it means. So you didn't do all the stuff I asked you to do. You circle them all, you label each of them, and you put below each of them what you think it means. Take about 1 to 2 more minutes. Okay, so looking up at the board, raising your hand, what are some things that people are noticing in this image that we have? Yeah, or not, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I don't know why I called you Jack. I literally was looking at, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So like under the pig, there's like words that say like bribery and fraud, like a characteristic of it.
Okay, good. So down here, the pig is, so by the way, who's eating it? So you have the pig. And the pig is sitting there eating like the bribery and different things like that, okay? What does it mean if he's sitting on a pig, by the way? Is it a nice thing if somebody calls you a pig? Not usually. What does it usually mean if somebody calls you a pig? Dirty, greedy, gluttonous, all these different things. So you can kind of think about that of why Andrew Jackson would be put onto a pig. Okay, what else are we noticing? I know that's not it. What else? Yeah. Okay, yeah, so the skull, which is usually representative of like death to something. In this case, it's like death to honest political things. Okay, what else? Yeah.
Like the White House in the background.
Yep, so he's in front of the White House. So we have this statue that's in front of the White House. You can see it in the back right there. Okay, what else? What's the saddle made out of? Money. Okay, so he's sitting on all this money and things like that, and then it has like bribery and things like that down here. Down below the pedestal, what is the pedestal referring to that he's on? It's the spoil system, right? So he's sitting there on this pedestal. It's got spoils. You can see it says spoils, spoils to the victor belong the spoils, different things like that. Okay, so now what I want you to do is go ahead and take this paper and flip it over. So we are going to begin in the next couple of months really looking at how we analyze primary sources in this class. Okay, so this is one technique of analyzing these primary sources. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of these, and for each box you need a minimum of 3 sentences. Okay, so again, for each box, a minimum of 3 sentences, and we are turning this in at the end of class, so make sure you get it done. So for the first box, we're going to think of historical context about this image. Now, probably the best historical context, you're either going to contextualize the spoil system, or you can contextualize Andrew Jackson. That's normally the most common one. Now, we've done contextualization several times in this class, so I want you to think about what happened before to cause the now. So, for example, what happened before to cause the spoil system to occur? What happened before Andrew Jackson's presidency that resulted in him becoming famous or election or whatever it could be? So remember, the very first one is going to always be prior to Andrew Jackson's presidency, prior to the spoils system, whatever you want to do. First sentence continues the definition. Second sentence defines whatever term you're going to use. The last one is connecting it to this political cartoon, or whatever topic this political cartoon is referring to. So 3 sentences. What's that?
What's the first sentence?
So just like historical context, you do prior to, and then you can do spoil system, Andrew Jackson, whatever you could want to do. And then you continue the definition. Second sentence is definition, and third sentence is connecting to your topic. Yeah. So this is in historical context. So you have to contextualize spoil system, not define spoil system. So you have to think what happened before to cause the spoil system to occur. So why did Andrew Jackson use the spoil system?
Because he was mad.
About what?
People not liking or not getting elected.
When? So contextualize that.
Okay.
So talk about how in a certain election, so name that election, the corrupt bargain occurred or something along the lines of that. And because he didn't win, he wanted to feel vindicated when he was eventually elected. It led to the creation of the spoil system or something like that.
Okay. And then the last sentence, what is it?
It's connecting it to your topic of spoil system. So there in yours, you just wrote about the spoil system for all 3 sentences. But that's not
Should be the last
contextualization.
sentence?
The last sentence only is the connection. You didn't write historical context there.
Right. Is this connection or not? It's not. It's just
Well,
like
I mean, technically it could if you added the other 2 sentences above, but you're not contextualizing there at all. Yeah.
Did you add anything to the last sentence, or did you like add in how like the picture? actually.
So you're having the same thing. Yours isn't contextualized.
So you have to add in like
That,
about
well,
the
no,
picture.
but you're not contextualizing at all. So you're just talking about the spoil system here. Do you remember how to contextualize on an LEQ?
Yeah.
So that's not how you contextualize. So do you see how you're just talking about the spoil system the whole
Yeah.
time? So you have to talk about what happened before the spoil system that led to the spoil system. So you have to think about the background of why the spoil system even was created. Okay, so your next section, which by the way, in this historical context, the most common things that people write about are usually the election of 1824, the creation of new political parties, corrupt bargain. You could talk about the War of 1812 and how Andrew Jackson was a big deal because of it. Those are the most common ones that I see that people end up doing. Okay, your next one is going to be I. Now, when we go into these next, especially I and then the other P's, everybody could have a different opinion on this. It's based on how you write it, and as long as you defend yourself, you're good to go. So the start of this section is if you want to put like the intended audience of this cartoon, that's fine to go ahead and start. So the intended audience of this cartoon, that's like a good way to lead into it. But you have to think of this, who are they trying to create this for? So I want you to think of this really hip thing called a meme, okay? And I want you to think if a meme was created about Donald Trump. Do you think that people reading that meme are more than likely going to be Trump supporters? Are they going to be people who don't like Trump? Is it going to be trying to convince people to like Trump, to not like Trump? That is basically what you're trying to do. So imagine if this is a meme, because these are basically, memes are modern day political cartoons, okay? So I want you to look at this and think, who are they trying to attract here? Who would they want to be seeing this? Who's the most likely person who's going to be looking at this and agreeing with it? Okay? Or possibly spiting somebody who doesn't agree with it. So the intended audience of this cartoon are Jackson supporters, Clay supporters, people who don't like Jackson, whatever it could be. Then you just defend it by using evidence in the document. So, for example, the intended audience of this are pig lovers. You can tell this because a pig is the center of the government as it is on the pedestal. If you notice, I reference a specific part of this. So, who is the intended audience of this document? So, go ahead and fill this section out. Remember, it should be a minimum of 3 sentences in each box. 3 sentences in each box. Yeah. He was a Democrat Republican, but then in this election he becomes a Democrat. He creates a new political party.
One specific audience? Or can you say it was meant for this purpose but could also be interpreted to...
Yeah. And a reader on the AP exam would like that. So if you analyze multiple perspectives, that works fine too, as long as you can support it. Now what I don't want to see you do is what I see some people do with intended audience. They say the intended audience are Americans because Andrew Jackson was their president. Way, way too broad. Okay? So make sure you're specific. So make sure you're using specific points of evidence in the image. About 1 more minute. Okay, so the next section is purpose. So looking at this, you have to think, why was this even created? Who would create this? What are they trying to say? So are they trying to put this out there to make and bring awareness to the slaughter of pigs for pork, for example? Are they trying to do this to bring awareness to why is there so many monuments in Washington, D.C.? I don't know what it's going to be. So you have to look at this and you have to think, why would somebody even bother to create this? Now you'll start to notice that your intended audience points might bleed into your other P's and things like that, which is fine. So if you're repeating yourself, that's okay. But I want you to think, what is the purpose? So if you put the purpose of this cartoon is to what? Is it to ban the slaughter of pigs? Is it to elect Jackson for a third term? What is it trying to do? So 3 sentences. Okay, so it looks like most people are done on that one. So we're going to go ahead and talk about the last one. So the very last one is the point of view. Now, this is going to be typically very similar to your intended audience. But I want you to think in this, what is the point of view? What is the point of view of Andrew Jackson? What is the point of view of the spoils system? Is it trying to say that Andrew Jackson was great, and that's the point of view? Is it trying to say that Andrew Jackson was a terrible person? Is that the point of view? So you can either do the spoils system or Andrew Jackson or the political sphere in general. But what is the point of view? So go ahead and finish that last box. Hello. It's okay. I have your grades, so don't look at them. Those are other people's, but I will get you yours. Oh, that one's actually yours. There you go. So we are just finishing up our assignment. That is the second page from last class period. Has this. Take about one more minute. And again, we're turning this in at the end of class, so make sure it's done. Okay. So, if you are still working on this, then that's fine. You have the next 10 minutes or so to be able to work on it. But I'm going to go ahead and finish up with the last couple of things. So you need to be back on your notes at this time. So, Andrew Jackson, by the way, is on your $20 bill. That's probably one of the most controversial presidents that's on one of our dollar bills. They actually passed a law about 8 years ago that they were going to replace Andrew Jackson with Harriet Tubman. They actually have a big movie coming out in a few weeks about Harriet Tubman, and that was all supposed to be next year for the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. They were going to put the first woman on a bill. However, about 2 years ago, the new presidency came in, and they felt like that was an overstep, and so they're no longer doing it anymore. But in theory, one day, we will have a woman on the bill. But it's not going to be next year unless something drastic ends up changing. Now, Andrew Jackson as a president. So things that Andrew Jackson did. So first, he reduced the federal power. That's probably his biggest one, as I would start that first bullet. He massively reduces the federal power, but makes the president have much more power. And really, it's because he distrusts everybody but himself. So instead of giving everybody else power, he only gave the power mostly to himself, because he's the one that he's going to trust the most. So he distrusted the government, and if you also highlight, he vetoed many bills, and we'll talk about that later as well. He hated Congress. He felt like Congress was always against him, so every time that they presented a bill, majority of the time he vetoed it. He vetoed about 75% of all the bills that came to his desk. He is not the top one. We did have a president that did veto about 95% of the bills that came to him. So he's not the top, but he did veto a lot. He was a big defender of slavery. He owned slaves and had a plantation, but he would not have that at the cost of his national unity. And then if you will bracket the last 3 bullets on here, that's going to be what he becomes really well known for. And so we're going to start into the one today, and then we'll finish it on Friday. So with the 5 civilized tribes, if you'll go ahead and star this. So this is going to be 5 tribes, in particular, right in this area of the United States. And they're known as the civilized tribes because they were considered much more civilized than the other native tribes. In particular, on the 5 civilized tribes, if you will highlight the Cherokee. The Cherokee are going to be the ones that are going to be the most civilized. And what I mean by that is the most similar to the white settlers around them. So, for example, the Cherokee Nation had actually supported and fought for Andrew Jackson during the Creek War. They also had made a treaty after the Revolution that they were not going to fight America and the white settlers, and they stuck with that treaty. So even after the fact that they didn't fight or anything like that, as we begin to move more and more west, our white settlers begin to want their land. Now, one of the reasons that we can say of how sophisticated they were is they're also going to be the ones that are going to create the first written language in Native American. So this is the Cherokee alphabet. And the Cherokee alphabet was really heavily used because they're also the first ones that are going to translate the Bible. So that was a really big deal. They were heavily Christian. And also, they had, this is a newspaper that they put out all across Georgia. And in that newspaper, it was half in Cherokee. So over here is the Cherokee language, and over here on the right is the English language. So they were very well sophisticated and very similar to the people around them. In particular, they owned slaves. So not only were they Christian, but actually 1 in 11 of the Cherokee Nation were actually slave owners. They had cotton. So to say that these Native Americans weren't similar to their white settlers around them is just incorrect. Now, what happens is that Andrew Jackson is going to begin a mass removal of Native Americans, in particular in Georgia. So in Georgia, the governor of Georgia wants people of white settlers to be able to have the land the Cherokee were on. So he begins to force Native Americans off of Georgia land and give that land to the white settlers. Now, this is what's known as the Indian Removal Act, so make sure you star this term, very important with Andrew Jackson. And the entire idea was basically to remove and resettle Eastern Native Americans, in particular the Cherokee, into the West. And the act also gave the president the ability to use any force necessary to be able to get that across. Now, we're going to talk about this more next class period, but I'm going to go ahead and end this so that people with computers can go put my computers away. But we will talk about the Inter-Removal Act next class period.